So, good morning, everyone. Welcome to Mapping Success, Building Effective Product Roadmaps for Drupal Projects. I'm Carrie Greer. Been in the Drupal community for over 15 years. We'll get into that a little bit later. And today we're going to explore how we create product roadmaps that lead to successful Drupal implementations. And because everything is better with puppies, we'll be using some puppy analogies, some puppy GIFs along the way to keep this memorable for y'all. So it's really a puppy-guided journey to better Drupal planning. So this is our agenda, and this is our journey. So we're going to start with the foundations of Drupal road mapping, how we've kind of carved out a little bit of a niche for it. Then we're going to dive into building your roadmap, managing timelines, talking about how we'll do resource management, exploring helpful tools and techniques. I've built in question breaks throughout, so feel free to ask questions and after each section, because like puppies, I know you're curious and full of energy at 9 a.m. on the first day of the conference, and so by the end, hopefully you'll have some practical strategies to help you all implement these immediately into your Drupal projects, or if you're starting a new one. A little bit about me before we begin. Like I said, my name's Carrie Greer. I'm a senior product strategist and solutions architect at Forum One. If you haven't heard of us, we've been in the Drupal community for over 15 years now. I'm slightly obsessed with puppies. I have 3 dogs. My mother-in-law has 9 dogs and 4 cats. And we have a farm with lots of animals. So I'm an animal-focused person. And just like puppies need training plans, Drupal projects need training plans too. So we're going to talk through all of those things this morning. Forum One is a digital agency, and we amplify the impact of mission-driven organizations through transformational digital solutions. So that's a little bit about our company. These are some of our most recent clients. We rebuilt EPA.gov in Drupal, State of Colorado, Baltimore County, Fairfax County, March of Dimes, State of Virginia, and my most recent client, DOI. Today, we're going to learn how to create Drupal-centric product roadmaps. So hopefully, I want you all to leave with these 3 key things. Applying prioritization techniques, which often we find people don't spend a lot of time doing, or resource management as well. And then effectively managing your roadmap for the long term. So I'm going to show you some real world examples towards the end. Before we get started, show of hands, how many of you created product roadmaps before? Okay, so lots of people. So are there any of you who have never done it? Okay, quite a few people. Maybe done it once or twice? Okay, couple. And how many of you are experienced road mappers? You've done it a lot. Yeah? The puppy with the map? Yeah? Okay, so lots of people have created them, some novices, lots of people. So don't worry if you're a beginner. Puppies and Drupal experts all need to start somewhere. So we're going to go through some training plans, some tips and tricks. And a lot of you are experts in this room. I'm a newer expert to product roadmaps just in the last 5 years, but I know a lot of you have been doing this for a really long time. So if you have tips or tricks or questions or things you want to add to the presentation throughout the way when we take question breaks, please feel free to speak up. So what is a product roadmap? Why do I need one? Why is it important? We need to establish, I kind of want to set a foundation. At its core, a product roadmap is a strategic document that communicates your vision, your direction, your priorities, and your progress of a product over time. Really, we think of it as like a journey map for your puppy's development from energetic novice, you just brought the puppy home, to somebody who you've lived with for a couple of years. For us, when we think of product roadmaps, there's definitely 4 essential components. First, it establishes your vision and goals. Secondly, it outlines with key milestones what your major releases are, your delivery dates. And third, it details its features and requirements. So these are specific tricks your Drupal site will learn and prioritize its value to its users. And finally, and again, I think this is the piece where most people forget, is that it counts for resources and dependencies. So most of the time, you've got the first three pieces done, right? You have your vision and your goals. Most people get that right. You've got your timeline and your key milestones. Most people get that right. You've got your features and your requirements. We'll get into that in a little bit. But fourth, and this is kind of what I want to spend more of our time on today, is how are we going to manage the timeline and how are we going to manage our resources? Because that's where most people are like, I can't get the amount of people that I need. I can't manage this timeline. Everybody's resource constrained, and we're going to go through some tips and tricks for that today. For us, when we're thinking of product lifecycle versus project lifecycle, I always like to pull this graphic up on any project or a product road mapping presentation that I do. These are from our friends at Ad Hoc. I'm not taking credit for it. A lot of people think of projects, Drupal projects, website build projects, new creation as, okay, I have a start of a project and I have the end of a project. We all know that's not how it works, right? A product has a cyclical cycle to it. There's a new insight. You have new stakeholder requirements that come in. So there is no beginning, middle, and end. Sometimes there are, sure, but most of the times there's not. So you need to be able to measure your impact, create your outcome, things like that. So I always like to show this because I think a lot of people still struggle with the fact that most projects are beginning, middle, and end, and they're just not. If you are starting a project from scratch and you're not sure where this fits kind of into your standard build cycle, we always recommend that you need to have a product roadmap before you start your build. Now, say you're in a cyclical project or a product, it's already been created, you can still start one. It's never too late. But if you're starting from scratch, you've got to have done the work in order for this to be correct, and you've kind of told your stakeholders about it, and you've really got that stakeholder buy-in before you start the build process. Otherwise, it's going to be way too late. I want to show you a quick example of what some of our product roadmaps look like. This is obviously sanitized and doesn't have any client names in them. But really for us, when we're thinking about product roadmaps, these critical elements really need to be in them: a strategic vision, user-centered priorities, technical feasibility mapping, and resource allocation planning. And if you're currently managing a Drupal product and don't have a roadmap, it's never too late to start. Like I said, you can start now. And I'm going to show you some samples later of ones that we've created that are super simple. It could be a spreadsheet. It could be a document. It could be anything you want. It doesn't have to be a super fancy interface in Jira or product board or anything like that. So why do you need one? Why is it important, right? Most people are like, why am I spending time doing this? I have my tickets, I'm in Jira, I'm in Confluence, I have my requirements, I have my AC. Why is this important? Why do they matter? They align all of your stakeholders in your organization around a common plan. And in Drupal, that's especially appropriate because of all of the choices that you're going to have to make before you start the project or while you're in the middle of the project. It clearly communicates progress and priorities, balances short-term execution with long-term vision, and helps you adapt to changing requirements while maintaining overall direction. So we're going to go through a couple of layers for how to communicate this and what this looks like. But a good roadmap, just like a puppy training plan, balances ambition with realistic expectations. So it's flexible enough to accommodate surprises, but structured enough to keep everybody moving kind of in the same time direction. And that's what's really important. So that's kind of my overview of roadmaps. I know for most of you that's just review. But before we get into the next section, this is usually how I start my project, and then someone's gonna see a squirrel and then it's gonna get crazy. Does anybody have any initial questions or have they run into challenges? Yeah, go ahead.
You had the product roadmap after design.
Yes.
How does that work with design not being part of the roadmap in practice?
So you're going to be creating the product roadmap during that time period. The documentation for the product roadmap needs to happen after the design. Yeah, so all of those things kind of come together to create that product roadmap documentation. So during the process of the start, you're going to be road mapping and doing activities, but you have to have that document completed before build. It's really a complement to design. Thank you for asking.
So you're saying it's being produced during discovery and design.
Correct.
And that's kind of like the milestone. You cannot not have it by this point.
Correct, yeah.
Okay.
Thank you for asking. Yeah, go ahead.
So you showed that table of like the, I guess, priorities for sprints. A thing that I've seen and did, which stinks, is take an agile process, do something like this, and turn it into a waterfall process.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you're going to get into this later, but do you have anything about in this initial plan when you're setting up priorities to prevent it from being just one dependency to one dependency to one dependency?
Okay, so for the recording, the question was, he had a kind of table like this set up, and it quickly kind of turned into a waterfall process. And how do you kind of keep this going without going from dependency to dependency? More like a Gantt chart, right?
Yes.
Yeah. That happens a lot. We do it ourselves. Everybody does it. Everybody wants to see a Gantt chart. Everybody wants to see a Gantt chart, right? What I'm suggesting, and we'll get into here, is it's okay to have both or three of them, because your different stakeholders are going to want different communication levels, right? They don't have the understanding. Most senior communications professionals or technology professionals at your organizations don't even know what the word agile means. They don't know what the word dependency means. They don't know what a module is. All they know is a Gantt chart. And that's probably going to go away in the next 10 to 20 years, but while those folks are still around and they're still your boss, you still need to appease them. Everybody's laughing because I know, I've been there, right? They're like, but Carrie, it's not a Gantt chart. Can you put it in a Gantt chart? Sure, you want a Gantt chart? I'll give it to you in a Gantt chart. So we're going to go through a couple of examples, but thank you for asking that question, because I have like a pyramid priority of how to communicate the product roadmap. Yes, Kirsten.
Since this is very project-based, would the room like to get continuing ed credit for this? We can issue it to you for Drupal for Harry, if you'd like to do that.
Oh, sure. So Kirsten mentioned that we could do continuing ed credit. So if you're in the room.
PMI certification or any other certifications, oftentimes you need your, you have to wait till the end of the session. I'll hang out with Carrie just to come up and we'll get you set up. If you would like to do that, Carrie.
Yeah, sure. I'd love to do that. Thanks, Kirsten. So if you want to hang out at the end, we will help you and we will get you your continuing ed credit for your certifications. Thanks, Kirsten. All right. Any more questions before we move on? Okay, so why we're all here. Why is a Drupal roadmap different than a regular one, right? Like, we all make roadmaps. Let's start by understanding what makes it different. So Drupal's like a puppy playpen. You need the right boundaries, the right toys, and room to grow. For us, really, Drupal module architecture and the fact that it's a framework means that our roadmaps need to be flexible and built like different ones. So unlike monolithic CMS structures, really Drupal gives us the ability to phase functionality, but that also requires more planning up front, which is a little bit different from like the typical Agile framework that you're thinking of, right? So for us, when we're thinking Agile, we're like, oh, we'll get to it later. In our experience, that doesn't really work. You need to make some decisions up front. So while Agile in practice works great if you have a huge monolithic product, with the smaller projects that we work on that I think everybody works on in this room, that kind of stuff doesn't work. You have to do the upfront planning. So what does that look like? We need to account for several unique factors when we're building a Drupal product roadmap. One is the community lifecycle, right? So Drupal is a community-based product, right? We have the Experience Builder product coming out. We have Layout Builder. We have paragraphs. We have new Drupal releases coming out into the community. Those core timeline updates and releases need to be built into your product roadmap, because the last thing you want to do is start building on one particular architectural style, and then all of a sudden the community has decided they don't want to invest time and money in that. I think we all remember the whole panelizer, panel panes debate, if you were around back then. That wasn't fun for anybody, and it cost people a lot of money, which is important because you want to make sure you're making sound investments for the future. So Drupal core updates as well. So you need to make sure you're timing your core updates in your roadmap cycle, right? Core updates require, even though, yes, they're just core updates, they're point releases, we don't think about it. But if you're a web manager or you're a technical lead, they still require regression testing. You can't just release a core update and not test it. So make sure your core release timeline and updates are included in your timeline. We also need to balance custom and contributed solutions, right? So everybody's gonna have some type of custom thing. My boss wants to pull in this table from 1997 and it's required and it's important or whatever. So that's really the kind of balance you need to strike in making sure you're documenting how much custom stuff are we doing or having to do, and how much of it are we gonna pull from the community space. And just like every puppy has different needs, I know all my puppies do, they're all crazy. Drupal projects really require tailored road mapping approaches that respect the platform's strengths and their limitations, right? So let's go deeper into technical architecture in Drupal and how we kind of have these discussions and how they go into the roadmap. So for me and for my team, when we are talking about Drupal technical architecture, we have 4 key things. The starter kit, Drupal 10, contrib modules. So what's your base, right? And most of you are thinking, well, I just download Drupal core and install it. If you're working with an agency, or if you are developing on your own, most people have a starter kit. Make sure you ask questions about it. What are they using? Are they downloading core or not? Our agency, we have our own starter kit. Acquia has their own starter kit. Lullabot has their own starter kit. Most agencies have their own starter kit, which ships with a standard set of modules. It's important to ask questions about it. Why are they using what they're using? What point release is it? What front end and back end theme are they using? This is important as well. You're probably just like, well, he just picks the theme? Like, does it matter? It does matter. It matters a lot, right? So again, Form 1, we have our own theme that we love, Gesso. We think it works great, but it's kind of locking you into our theme and how we've built it and developed it, which we love and I think is awesome, but maybe you as the customer or your organization doesn't want to use that. Maybe you want to use something that's different or better from the community because your people have more experience with that particular technology. Also, the backend theme. Not everybody is using Gin, which is the newer Drupal backend theme. I don't know why. I think you should. It's fantastic. But these are questions you need to ask because it can really shift the experience that your users are going to have, and it's important to have these discussions early on in the road mapping process. Let's talk about page building and page creation architecture. That's kind of how I describe it. Experience building, things like that. There's a lot of different opinions in the Drupal community about this. I have my own opinions about it. I think other people have their own opinions about it. Are we using paragraphs? Are we using Layout Builder? Are we going to wait for Experience Builder to come out? Are we using Acquia's Site Studio? Are we using layout paragraphs? There's a lot of different discussions in the community and the decisions that you make early on, especially in road mapping, can have long-term consequences, for good or bad. And again, I'm going to go back to the whole, we thought Panelizer was going to be the end-all, be-all, and we were going to have fieldable panel panes, and it was going to be amazing. And then we had to migrate and upgrade from Drupal 7 to Drupal 10, and it was a nightmare. So it's important that you make these architectural decisions based on what your user needs, but also what's possible for the future, right? So both things have to be true. It can't just be, oh, we're doing this for the solution because that's what the user needs. Fine, great. But if that is at the behest of future architectural decisions, that's not good either. So that's kind of why I harp on these things in road mapping, because these are questions, decisions, and discussions that need to be had during the road mapping process. What Drupal architectural approach am I taking? How am I building these pages out? Okay, I have these beautiful designs from my design team. How are we going to make these work in the back end? Are we going to have 20 paragraphs? Are we going to have Layout Builder that puts these components together? How is that going to work, and what is that experience going to be for my content authors? So it's really important to have all of those discussions at the start. And lastly, your hosting environment. We can't harp on, a lot of people, I know if you are a tech guy or person, you have been hit with a lot of AI bot traffic in the last couple of weeks. It's been awful, and I've been woken up at 3 o'clock in the morning way too many times. And our hosting partners have been awesome, but some of them haven't been. So you need to make sure you have those things in place for the 0-day necessary items. Also, your hosting partner, Pantheon, Acquia, yourself, AWS, Amazy, Platform SH, whoever it is, they all have their own specific ways and products that they offer, which could, again, affect your architectural approach. So it's super important to kind of, again, have those discussions at the start and make some decisions about it. So going back to the question that we had over here, roadmap levels. Generally, I like to have 3. Your strategic level. This is your Gantt chart person. This is your boss's boss. This is the slide that you need to have in a PowerPoint presentation to send to somebody. Then you have your tactical level one. This is generally like, it could be a slide too. It could be something in product road mapping tools, could be a spreadsheet. And then you have your implementation level. This is like your JIRA tickets, right? It's important to have all 3 levels and really think about, okay, well, who am I communicating to when I'm creating these things, right? So at the strategic level, you're just trying to be a good puppy, trying to like, hey, parents, give me some treats. The tactical level is, okay, what's our feature planning and architectural decisions? And implementation level, this is your daily JIRA ticketing software. In my experience, most people have implementation level. You need to have your JIRA tickets. And they might have one of these, but they don't have both. And that's the problem. Because your boss might get your tactical level Gantt chart spreadsheet thing and be like, yeah, I totally get this. I'm telling you right now, they don't understand it. They just don't. They don't want to tell you. So really think about who they have to communicate with. Maybe they need a Gantt chart. Fine, put it in a Gantt chart, communicate it to them differently, but on the tactical level, make sure that you have something that works for your team. It's okay to have both. One or the other isn't the best answer. So let's go back to some puppy gifts while I got off my soapbox about Drupal architecture. Just like getting a new puppy, which I have 3 puppies at my house right now. It's a lot of work. Starting a Drupal project needs proper groundwork. I think a lot of people, they just jump in. They're like, oh, I'm going to create a Drupal project. Great. What's the roadmap going to look like? Your assessment at the start really needs to include all of these things we talked about. You need to think hard about, okay, how am I going to communicate this out? What's my current state? What do I want my future state to be? And an honest review of your organizational capabilities and constraints. That's really important. Because all of this sounds great, but if you can't actually implement it, what's the point? So to get some idea generation going in our organization, a lot of folks will think they need some, oh boy. Okay, tech issues. Sorry about that. Okay, so you're gonna start your roadmap. Where do I start? What do I do? Is it a document? Is it Post-it notes? Is it scribbles? Give me anything. For us, this is a Google document with some bullet points. At least I got something down. And I'm not just like having a meeting and it's nothing. On the right, a lot of people, top right, Fig Jam and Mural, very, very popular. I'm gonna be like a Fig Jam and Mural like hater for like 2 seconds. Like, I can't read that. Like, maybe I'm just like a young person in an old person in a young person body, but like it is really hard for me to understand what's on a Fig Jam and a Mural board. And I can imagine your boss does too. So when you have sat down and you're like, yeah, we've done our roadmap, here's the mural link, they're like, what is this? I've been in that room. I've done the architecture. I'm like, yeah, it's a mural. Take a look. And the person's like, I can't read that. Like, I don't know what that is. So you need to make sure you're translating it for the people who are going to be understanding it. They're not all like us, where we're in Fig Jam and Mural all the time and we understand it and we get it. So that needs to be translated. And guess what? Everybody likes a slide deck or a document. I'm sorry, but you got to put it in one. It's okay. We're really big fans at Forum of Jira's product discovery tool. It's fairly new. If you don't have access to it, ask your Jira admin. We use it quite a bit. It's in the upper left. I can't show you a real project. I wanted to, but we did not get clearance to do that. So this is just like a test project. But if you don't have Jira product discovery or you haven't used it yet, please take a look. It's great. Product board's great as too, but I feel like most people already have Atlassian suites of products. So go ahead and check this out. And sticky notes. Most people, sticky notes, it's Fig Jam, but in real life. We're all getting back to real life after COVID, so sticky notes work great as well. So this is all to say you don't need a fancy tool to do your road mapping. It can be simple. All right, so that's the first thing. You've got your ideas. You've had your Drupal architecture discussions, decisions. Stakeholders. They're like a crowd of puppies. What the roadmap does is they are going to align your stakeholders and clearly communicate progress and priorities. So a good roadmap balances ambition with realistic expectations. It's flexible enough to accommodate enough surprises, so you're always going to have that coming up. You need to make sure you leave contingency. I always like to have like a contingency section or area. Just call it contingency. You know it's going to happen. For anybody that works with or in federal government, we just had that happen. We were like, a lot of stuff needs to change now. We had contingency time set in so that it wasn't going to affect the budget. It wasn't going to mess our whole roadmap up because we had contingency time. I like 20% as a rule, but lately it's been more like 40. So 20 to 40% of anything that you're building needs to be set aside for contingency. And really, for these stakeholders, I like to break them down into 4 groups: content teams, technical teams, leadership, and end users. These are the people we're going to be talking to with the roadmap, but also that the product needs to speak to. So for leadership, like we talked about with the Gantt chart, they want to know, what's my return on investment, what's the timeline, and what's strategic alignment. It can be 3 slides. It doesn't have to be some fancy Gantt chart. It doesn't have to be anything crazy. They want a stoplight. They want a quick memo. End users, if you are creating a product that is communicated to the public, they need some information about it as well. It's really important that they have an intuitive experience when they're with your product, but they understand what the potential future of it is. And I think some of the folks in our community have done a really good job, Pantheon and Acquia, of telling us, okay, here's where our products are moving forward to. In content teams, they want an intuitive admin experience and workflow tools, and they often get forgotten about. Please don't forget about your content teams. I was just in the Gov Summit yesterday, and the number one complaint that people had was content administration. It's still a problem in Drupal. It hasn't been fixed. Gen is fantastic and it's great, but content administration is still the number one thing that you will encounter long term that you have to deal with. Hey, I want a button in the WYSIWYG that's purple. Or I use purple, that example a lot, because it's gonna come up. So we need to make sure we're accounting for it. Also, if you have a product, you need to communicate and get feedback from the content team, because they're the people who are using it every day. Don't think you know better than them, because they're the one who's doing it. They have to be adding to the content, so make sure you have a way to get feedback from them, but you're also communicating to them what's coming up, so they know, so that you don't get 18 tickets asking for the same thing. So it's important to have your internal communication done as well. And your tech team, they need to know what's coming up. It can't just be your leadership. So what are the code standards? What's the architecture approach that we've agreed upon? All of those things are important. Okay. Puppies. Questions? Second round of questions. Are we confused about anything? Oh, okay. Lots of hands. Go ahead.
So, I'm in a situation where I need a public roadmap.
Yeah.
So how would you characterize what is going to be different for public versus like internal? Because internal is going to be planning. It's going to be a little more like, well, hey, you know, you're early on. Like, do we want to go? If you go back a couple years, layout paragraphs versus layout builder. That's something that high-level stakeholders don't care about. You know, so that doesn't need to be in a public roadmap. But at the same time, public roadmaps, like you can have uncertainty 18, 24 months out, where it's just like, we don't know what's going to happen here. So what are your thoughts in terms of public versus private?
So for me, when I think about public roadmaps, it's always important to communicate what your business goals are to the public, right? So if your roadmap 24 months out is, we want to make page creation better, it's better to communicate that than nothing at all. It's hard to quantify, well, what does that mean exactly? That's okay. I think it's better to communicate something rather than nothing at all. But for the public's purposes, depending upon what the Drupal product is, if it's a government website or if it's a website for a museum or a cultural institution, say there's something that you're building that's like that, I think it's important to at least have your business needs and your user needs communicated out. We're going to add mapping functionality. That's okay. It can be that generic. But I think personally that it's important to at least have kind of like at least a high level of that requirement base communicated out publicly. Does that answer your question?
No, that's great. Thank you.
Yeah. Go ahead. The Jira extension we used was called Jira Product Discovery. And if you want to stay after the session, I can show it to you. It's like, if you haven't heard of it, it's awesome. Any more questions? Is this enough puppy gifts?
No.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. No, there's not. But it's 9 a.m. on the first day, so I'm trying to like keep everybody awake. All right. So let's talk about prioritization. I think everybody can like create a roadmap, right? It doesn't seem too complicated. How do we do this? And how do we allocate the resources? When I asked a few folks yesterday, they were like, this is my problem. How do I do that? How do I manage my resources and how do I prioritize? I think we've all heard of these things. The Moscow framework, the impact effort matrix, the Cato model, rice scoring, feasibility. These are all various different types of prioritization techniques. For Drupal in particular, I recommend using the Moscow method with a Drupal twist or impact versus effort. And we'll go into some examples. And let's remember the puppy principle of prioritization. So when you're doing prioritization, let's just think about puppies. Always handle your basic training before your advanced tricks. Gotta make sure they understand the fundamentals. So in Drupal world, that means the architecture decisions I mentioned at the top. What are those core things? Let's make those first, right? Let's make those priority. So core functionality, content structures, and I know there's going to be people in the room who are like, well, the user needs need to come first. Yeah, absolutely, but you can't build for user needs if you don't have a foundation. So like, let's get the foundation of the training essentials down first before we build any interactive fancy features. Because you can't build your fancy features if you don't have your base. So I'm gonna go through a couple of examples of prioritization techniques. We could spend a whole hour on prioritization, so I just wanna touch on this because I wanna be able to make sure we have time for resource allocation as well. But here's some things that you can do for prioritization. This is part of your roadmap. It's not separate. It's a piece of it. So this is the Moscow method slide. For example, maybe we're launching a book review website. Must have, should have, could have, won't have is what Moscow means. So you need to have your musts, your shoulds, your coulds, and your won'ts. And make sure, this is a great tool for that strategic level person that we talked about at the start. Hey boss, this is what we're thinking. Cool? Can be very high level. This one's a bit more complicated. Let's talk about value effort. First of all, how do you quantify value effort? That's a good question. I still haven't figured that one out. If you have thoughts and ideas, let me know after. We can touch on this a bit, but really for us, we like to think about the time scale of Drupal projects as like components. And I know people are gonna be like, oh, well, design components, but like, what's the component of that thing? And what is the team telling me we need to complete that thing? Okay, so say we have a map feature. It's gonna have all the things that we need to do to make the map feature work. The integration, the design, the building, the testing, the QA. That map feature we think is going to be a lot of effort, but a lot of value. So let's put it in the upper right-hand corner. These can be things that you discuss together as a team, but really on a feature level, you need to go more high level. Where I found that teams kind of have issues with this is they're like, well, the home page is 4 points and the basic page is 2 points. Let's just call it pages. So it's really important to bring it a level up instead of being in the detail world, because in that it just gets too complicated. Again, this is something great to communicate out to your teams. I think another thing, and this is something that my product team at Form 1 brought up, is like, how do I quantify effort and impact, and what is that going to affect on the timeline? And how important is estimation? Estimation is one of the most important things that you can do when you're managing projects in the long term. If you don't have a good estimator or you're not sure, just take the number they've given you and add like 30%. Because generally that's what it's going to be. That's been my experience. I see a lot of head nods in the front, but like, I always just add 30%. It's generally right at that point, but it's hard. So if you have any like golden rules for this, let me know. All right. So, oh, go ahead.
I have a golden rule. In 18 years of running a business, we have never done an estimate that was correct.
There you go.
So the rule is to estimate wrong.
Yeah. That's a great rule of thumb. Yeah, go ahead.
I would keep estimates really light because having done detailed estimates, they end up not being right.
Correct, yeah.
And they take a huge amount of time. And the value that you get out of it versus the time put in is really bad. Like the back of the napkin, we know this isn't right, but it's like it's bigger than bread box, but smaller than elephant is way better than
I agree with that. Okay.
The flip side to that, of course, is that your client expects estimates.
Yeah. They're going to want an estimate, right?
They have crystal balls, right?
That's why I like this for potentially communicating with clients, or like hard, not as hard, kind of simple. So when you're an agency owner communicating with clients or something like that, that I like using this if I can, if I think it's something they're going to understand. Keep your audience in mind. Can they understand this, right? Oh, I want that map feature, but it's going to be a lot of time, and it's going to be a lot of money, and we only have this amount of money. Is that okay? Let them be involved in your decision-making process. But also, and a lot of times, clients may not know what that means. So make sure you go in with a recommendation. Don't just ask them what they want, because 9 times out of 10, they might not know what they want. I had a prioritization exercise in here, but I want us to try this together. I want us to look at these sample features for an online gallery. Take 60 seconds. Just think about it in your head. I'm building this out. I want y'all to mentally categorize them into must have, should have, could have, or won't have for the first release. So what's going to be included? First release. We're road mapping in our heads. Everybody got it? I see Mark shaking his head, yes. All right, show of hands. Who had in the first release in their head content workflow approval system? Who had advanced search? Who had customized theme with responsive design? Okay. Who had multilingual content support? All right, so if you looked around the room, you saw that there are different perspectives on what's going to be included in the first release. This is important because different perspectives impact prioritization. What you may think is priority isn't everybody else's priority, and that's important. This is where, as if you're part of an agency or if you're working as a website owner or a web manager, it's important to get leadership's input and take on it. Because what's important to them, you might think is stupid. I'm sorry to use the word stupid, but like I've been in that room where the agency owner is like, I really want this interactive timeline and it's my #1 priority. And I'm thinking to myself, the site's not accessible. It's not multilingual. We haven't finished all this stuff, but this is their priority. You have to shift. So sometimes you have to do things you don't want to do or like to do. We all know that, and we've been in that room before. But again, that's their priority. So I think when it comes to basic stuff like this, it's really important to keep in mind psychologically. We're all humans. We all think differently and act differently. All right, I had another pause for questions here. I'd love to hear any other thoughts on prioritization challenges that you all are facing. Have some discussion about it. Thoughts? Yeah.
Well, since Dr. Lakers was on there, it was my understanding that if you don't put it in right away, it's very hard to, afterwards get it in. So that's why we prioritize getting this in. I don't know, technical stuff, if you take this with your must-have and stuff like that.
It depends on the organization and what you're building, right? So what are the user needs? If it's absolutely necessary for the product to be multilingual, then yes, it should be built in the beginning. But if it's not necessary, if it's something that's just in English, maybe it's just in French, maybe it's just in Spanish, then it might not be a priority. So I think it depends. Again, that goes back to user needs, but it also goes back to opinions within the organization. I would argue if you're McDonald's and you're selling hamburgers, multilingual is probably going to be pretty important for your website because you're a Fortune 500 company, right? You're big. But if I'm a library in rural America where there's no foreign language speakers, maybe it's not as important because you have limited resources. So we can't build everything for everybody all the time. That would be tough. Go ahead.
I think I would refine that to say if there's any chance down the road that your site is going to go multilingual, you need to plan for it ahead. You may not need to build it
Yep.
out of the gate, but you need to plan your architecture in such a way that you are prepared to do that down the road.
Yep.
Just give it the thought. You don't even need to build it, but it should be in your roadmap as we are going to do this later, so we are planning for it now. Because you're right, it is more difficult to add in later, especially if you haven't done the planning upfront.
Yep. In the back?
Sometimes when we have multiple projects running and leadership is not aware of multiple projects, that one person from leadership is aware of one, another person aware of the other, it gets super difficult to prioritize when you have just, I'm talking from an NGO angle, we just have that one small team with just that number of people, and it's super crazy to keep deadlines and estimations and that. I know that there's no, one solution fits all kind of a thing here.
Yep.
But this is a challenge that a lot of NGOs face all the time.
Go ahead.
This is actually kind of following up on your question. I've been in that situation before. When you have multiple stakeholders
Yeah.
with competing priorities, do you have suggestions on systems for helping to, centralize those priorities, like whether it's group voting or other things like that?
So I have a couple of things and a couple of suggestions for that. One is going to be a human thing and one's going to be a systems thing. I think we're all going to want to hear the systems, but the human part is everybody has their own priorities and we need to make sure we're convening those individuals together in one group so that they can make the decisions themselves. It's not our job to do it for them. So, for example, on a lot of projects that I work on, there's competing priorities. You're going to, from an NGO standpoint, you're going to have your communications team, you're going to have or maybe you have your grant management team, you're going to have your fundraising team, you're going to have your CEO's office. They're going to want some fancy feature because somebody they met at a conference told them that my website has this thing and it's really cool and I need to have it now. Well, all of those individuals, doesn't have to be all the time, but can get in a room and look at it all together and make some decisions themselves. And leave it up to your boss to make the decision, not you, if you can. So I found this is often super helpful when we start projects, but then this doesn't happen again, right? Everybody's like super excited. They understand the priorities at the start of the project. They know and they can prioritize. But it's like a year down the road and they're like, well, my thing didn't get built when we built the website and it's your fault because you didn't build it. And now I'm mad because I'm the CEO and I wanted my thing, right? Like that always happens. Well, you can, hey, we need to make sure those discussions are happening all the time. So that's the human part of it, right? There needs to be consensus. Your web product might be the biggest thing that you do in your organization. And it's important from a human buy-in standpoint that we are discussing those things together as human beings. Because everybody's going to have their own priorities. And so your head of fundraising, what you might have a meeting for, oh, I need all this stuff. Oh, your head. Let's bring all of those people together. So that's the human aspect of it. I think a lot of people forget about that. Second thing is going to be prioritization tools, techniques, right? I'm going to go back to this, which I know is a little bit of a different method, but I like this, right? So when we start projects or we have product roadmaps, I like to send something out regularly that's like, okay, humans, people, whoever they are, your boss, your puppy trainer, your fundraising director, chief of comms, hey, this is the website project we're working on, and this is our priority. Let me remind you of this, right? Can you use a fancy tool like Jira Product Discovery and give people access to it? Yeah, you can. They're not going to look at it. They're just not. They want something simple, right? They need something done in 30 seconds. So it's an email, it's an image, something like that they can see really, really quickly. So that's kind of what I recommend for that. Go ahead.
I think there are also times where you can't get all the stakeholders in a room. Where
Yeah.
the CEO is too busy and he's designated someone, but that someone doesn't have decision-making authority.
Yep.
And so they have to go back and you just have to embrace the suck.
Yep. Yep.
Well, you're gonna end up something suboptimal. And as long as everyone's comfortable with, well, this was made with imperfect information, that's fine. But I think the organization's got to wrap its mind around that's probably not what the organization is.
That's where you get everything right.
Yeah, and that's the tricky part. I think communicating oftentimes with this is the most difficult part. But again, what I found is to keep it simple. You don't need a fancy system for it. All right, let's talk about timelines and managing resources. And I realize I'm going super long, but that's okay. So when setting timelines for your product roadmap, we're always going to want to factor in Drupal's release cycle, the learning curve for your teams of the new feature that you're building, and integration complexities. So a good rule of thumb that we all mentioned, which we're never going to have the timeline or estimates correct, as we've all discussed before, but we need to present something. So what I like to do from a timeline standpoint is add 20 to 40% to whatever timeline you think you're going to have, and maybe have contingency at the end. So we know that puppies don't grow overnight. These roadmaps don't happen overnight, and neither do Drupal projects. And so when setting timelines, these are kind of some of the things that I like to take into consideration. Content migration, training and adoption, testing and refinement, development and complexity factors. So always leave a buffer in your timeline. Make sure there's breathing room. And the best roadmaps are written in pencil, not permanent marker. So be prepared to adapt, right? So that's the contingency that I mentioned before. So we always leave a big box at the bottom of our timeline for contingency, like stuff we don't know yet is oftentimes what I just call it. The clients get really, parking lot, stuff we don't know yet. Clients get really uncomfortable with that section, but as long as you get their buy-in, it's great. All right, so timeline pitfalls. I think we all have handled these before. Scope creep, technical debt accumulation. No one wants to talk about technical debt. Underestimating configuration complexity, especially in Drupal. Oh, well, yeah, I did that like last year where I installed this module and it worked fine. Guess what? It doesn't work fine, and now I need a new patch, and the patch is still being worked on by somebody, and I don't know when it's going to be done. Those things happen. So don't let your project chase every squirrel it sees. One benefit of Drupal being a community-based product is you can clearly define phase boundaries, but you can also pivot quickly. So if something isn't working, abandon it. So this is also can be really useful for managing scope as well. So talking and going back to kind of how we're managing stakeholders and stakeholder expectations. It's 6 months in, your boss comes to you and they want the timeline. It has to be included. There's always going to be an answer to the problem. I always have one mantra when I'm thinking about this stuff, when I'm planning a roadmap. What's the simplest way I can achieve this to meet the user's objectives? That's it. There's going to be a simple answer for everything. Generally. Sometimes there's not. But generally, from a client perspective, from your boss's perspective, from a road mapping perspective, there's going to be something simple that you can do. I could go into a whole hour on technical debt, so we're just going to leave that one here. And if you want to talk after, we can talk after. And I'm going to go into resource allocation next with the last few minutes that we have, because I'm way over time. All right, so resource management and allocation. I think this is the second major thing that people struggle with. And these are kind of the things that we have found work best. Are we the magic people who have this figured out? Absolutely not. But these are some of the things that work for us. Team allocation. Make sure you know what your people can do. So what skills do they have? Maybe there's somebody who has a skill set that you didn't know about. Ask questions, right? Make sure that there's, hey, if this person's available and they can do this work, but maybe it's not in their job title, great. Pull them in. Time budgeting. These are all important things. Everybody forgets about content migration. Please don't. Again, I can go on a whole hour about content migration and content management and how people don't spend enough time thinking about it. But I'm going to go back to buffer time. No one ever puts in buffer time, ever. I will leave this room and say, roadmaps, buffer time, and puppies are the 3 things I want you to leave with. Buffer time, it's important. And workload balancing. So I think Jasmine asked me this question yesterday. She was like, how do I manage my resources? That's the number one thing she wanted to get away. All of these things together are going to help you manage your resources. So think about it holistically. What's my priority? In my Moscow method, what's the priority? What did we discuss was the priority? That's how you fight for your resources. 2, what's the timeline? What is the agreed upon timeline that we discussed? Okay, person, this is what we discussed. I need these individuals to do this because that's what you said the priority was. And lastly, can you bring in workload balancing? Can you bring in external resources? Absolutely. But if you work in any type of NGO or public environment, you know that that's really hard to do. So you might just have to work with the internal team that you have. So all of these things combined together allow you to make those decisions with your people, right? I think oftentimes we're in, going back to the word the suck, which I love. Thank you for using that. We're in the suck, right? This new thing just came up. Oh my gosh, oh my gosh, oh my gosh. Like, I don't have the resources for this. I always go back to what was our prioritization? What was our timeline? And let's discuss this as a team. Hey team, this thing came up. This is what we said was the prioritization. This is what we said the timeline was. Let's think strategically about this together for how we can get this to happen. And generally, there's always going to be an answer. There's never not an answer. Hey, we could do these 4 things simpler, and I can pull in this person from here, and this can happen, right? There's no silver bullet answer to that, but your team generally is going to have an answer for how to get something done. I'm going to skip this because I only have 2 minutes left and I want to show you guys some examples. This is Jira Product Discovery in a big screen. You can see this after. The cool thing about it, it integrates with your Jira tickets. And that looks like this. It's so amazing. This is just from their website. I have real examples. If you want to come and see me after, I'll show you those. But this is your feature. These are your Jira tickets. It's fabulous. Here's another simple example. This we did for AARP. Now, next, later. That's it. That was our roadmap. Done. Simple, easy for people to understand. Not complicated. Here's a little bit more of a complicated one that kind of looks like a Gantt chart. Again, this was to communicate to leadership. Here's one we used weekly. Money. This is what's in our initial go live. The dots mean the complexity of the feature. What we did was we made the dots a different color when they were close to completion. And this was a roadmap we used with the client on a weekly basis. So weekly status call, we looked at this together. Hey, how are we doing? And then we could move things around as we needed. Loved this. Again, it's simple. Are we in a fancy tool? No. And then you can get really simple. We're actually, this is a real product that we have now. But guess what? We have it. I think that's the most important thing. It's here. Is it fancy? No, it's a Excel spreadsheet. It is a Google sheet. It is not fancy at all. If you want to stay after for questions, please do. Thank you for joining me this morning. I hope the puppy gifts made everything more exciting. This is my first DrupalCon session, so thank you. Please contribute to DrupalCon. We love y'all. If you have any concerns and questions about Code of Conduct as well, but please contribute. If you have any feedback and you don't want to give it to me, you can always email info@forum1.com and tell me if I was horrible or if I was great. And if you have any questions, come see me after. Thank you, everyone.